Hello and welcome to the podcast. This is Ron's Amazing Stories, where we tell ghostly tales to keep your spirits up. On today's program, I hope you're ready for a treat. We have one of the finest ghost storytellers available. I'll tell you more about her in a minute, but first, we have a Halloween tradition to fulfill. Each year, I play one of my favorite poems of the season called The Hag. This year, I revamped it a bit, and I hope that you enjoy it. Here is The Hag.
This night we're to ride, the devil and she together, through thick and through thin, now out and then in. Yes, so foul be the weather. A thorn or a burr she takes for a spur, with a lash of a bramble she rides now. Through brakes and through briars, or ditches and mires, she follows the spirit that guides now. No beast for his food dares now range the wood, but hushed in his lair he lies lurking, while mischiefs by these, on land and on seas, noon and night are working. The storm will arise and trouble the skies, this night and more for the wonder. The ghost from the tomb affrighted shall come, called out by the clap of thunder.
That poem was written by Robert Herrick in 1648. It was read by, well, we'll just keep that a secret, and the music and sound effects were done by yours truly. Herrick was born in Cheapside, London in 1591, and yeah, that is a real place. He became a member of the Sons of Ben, which is a group centered upon the admiration of the works of Ben Jonson. Herrick wrote at least 5 poems to Jonson. He took holy orders in 1623, and then in 1629 he became the vicar of Dean Prior in Devonshire. It's hard to imagine a proper cleric writing of witches and ghosts, but he did. Today is a special show, and one that I've been looking forward to. Anytime Sylvia Shults comes on the program, 2 things happen. Amazing stories, and they are told amazingly well. Sylvia has a brand new book ready to come out on October 10th called 44 Years in Darkness, a true story of madness, tragedy, and shattered love. I'm sure we'll get her to tell us all about it and probably share a few stories as well. So I introduce ghost hunter, author, motorcycle gang member, and librarian, Sylvia Shults. Welcome to the podcast, Sylvia.
Thank you, Ron. It's a pleasure to join you again. I don't know, your listeners must be really wondering about me by now.
Well, did I miss anything? Let's see. Ghost hunter, right?
Member. The motorcycle gang member part, well, the gang consists of myself and my husband, so.
Well, I may have embellished on that one.
Well, okay, we'll let you.
But I don't know, I just thought of a contrast, motorcycle gang member and librarian.
I like it.
So, do those things really go together? Obviously,
well,
they do.
It's funny. I'll be at work. I work the circulation desk at a public library, and people will come in. They'll say, "Wow, I saw that motorcycle in the parking lot," and they never assume it's one of our patrons. They always assume it's a staff member, and they're like, "Hey, who rides the motorcycle out in the parking lot?" They always assume that it's my boss because he's a guy. And they'll ask him about his motorcycle, and he'll point to me. He's like, it's hers. So we have fun blowing people's minds like that. It's a sleek Ducati. It's a 695 Monster. It's gorgeous.
And you have a lettered jacket on the back that says Hex Angels or something?
Born to read.
Like I said, you never know what you're going to get with Sylvia.
Well, my husband was kind enough to, he's my idea guy. He's just wonderful. He comes up with my titles and whatnot. He came up with the biography that I used for this new book. He said something about Sylvia Shults has worked as a librarian for the past 19 years, and she's been slowly smuggling enough words out from work in her pocket to build a book of her own.
That's pretty good.
Which is good. I enjoy that. I enjoy making people laugh, and I enjoy giving people shivers, and I enjoy them in equal amounts.
Well, I love books, and I am looking forward to one that's coming out on October 10th. You want to tell us all about it?
Oh, I would love to. 44 Years in Darkness is about one of the patients at the Peoria State Hospital. If your listeners have tuned into this show before while I've been on, you guys know that I am passionately invested in the Peoria State Hospital. It's a place of caring and compassion, and it is also filled to the rafters with spirits. I mean, you say haunted mental asylum, and that's what you immediately assume is it's gonna be just stacked with ghosts. And fortunately, I live just a 10-minute motorcycle ride away from this marvelous, marvelous place. So one of the patients at the Peoria State Hospital was a woman named Rhoda Derry. Now, Rhoda came to us from the Adams County Poor Farm. She had spent years there. She was a very violent patient. She spent years basically locked in a cage. She had started to self-abuse in her confinement. She clawed her own eyes out. She beat her front teeth in. And what had she done to warrant this? What had she done to deserve being placed in a cage for 4 decades? She fell in love.
Oh, my.
She fell in love, and it ruined her life. The story of Rhoda Derry is, it's one of the great tragedies of mental health care in the state of Illinois, and it's one of the great success stories of the state hospital system in Illinois.
The Derrys were very, very poor. They were dirt farmers. They, for most of their family history, they are shown in the census records as living with other farm families. So they did not have any land to call their own. Now, Charles and his family, the Phoenixes, were very well off. Charles was the second child of 4, and he was the oldest son. So when he came of age, he stood to inherit his father's land. So the Phoenixes were very well off. Now, Mrs. Phoenix, Nancy Phoenix, Charles's mother, was very much against this relationship. She did not want her baby boy marrying one of these dirt poor Derrys. So she was just really against the relationship right from the start. Now, we don't know how far Charles and Rhoda's relationship actually went, but we do know that after they had been courting for a couple of years, Charles asked Rhoda to marry him, and she said yes. Now, Nancy was furious about this. She's like, how can I stop this from happening? So she confronted Rhoda in the street And she said, if you do not release my son from this engagement, I will curse you. Now, this is something that Rhoda would have taken seriously because her grandmother, Moll Derry, was known as the fortune teller of the Revolution. Moll Derry actually came over from Germany with her husband, disguised herself as a man, and fought alongside her husband in the Revolutionary War.
Wow.
Yeah, fascinating woman. They were Hessian soldiers, and they actually switched sides. They fought for the American side against the British.
Huh.
And after the war, they settled in Pennsylvania, and Moll became a practitioner of Pennsylvania Dutch hex magic. She was known, she had a reputation for being able to cast and lift curses. So talking about witchcraft in front of Rhoda Derry really would have gotten her attention quickly. So a few weeks after this confrontation with Nancy Phoenix, Rhoda started acting very strangely. She went downhill very, very quickly. She would hallucinate that there were invisible witches flying around the cabin where the family lived, and she would cower in terror, screaming about these invisible witches flying overhead. Her mother, Rachel, took to keeping a loaded pistol in her apron pocket, and she would shoot at these witches that were flying around the cabin.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and she seemed to be the only one that even took Rhoda seriously when she would be screaming about these witches that were attacking her. The sad part about this is that Nancy seems to have had a change of heart. Both families lived in small towns. Word spread that Rhoda was having troubles. So Nancy actually tried to get in to see Rhoda, and she tried to tell her, look, there is no curse. You're fine. There's no curse. You're okay. But Rhoda was too far gone by that point to even listen. She wouldn't even talk to Nancy at all, and I don't blame her a bit. Rhoda was placed in the Jacksonville State Hospital for the Insane at Jacksonville, Illinois. She was there for 2 years. She was released as incurable. And the strange thing about that part of her life is that she was housed in the violent ward. She was locked in her room every night. And every morning, she would be found wandering the grounds, calling for Charles.
Wow.
And when the attendants would find her, they would say, who let you out? How'd you get out? Who let you out? And Rhoda's answer was always the same. Nancy Phoenix let me out.
Huh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Creepy and weird, and no one's ever been able to explain it.
It's a ghost story, but not really a ghost story, but yet creepy as heck.
It is. Well, it becomes a ghost story later on. Right now, the story of Rhoda's life is just so fascinating. Even if there wasn't a ghost story attached to her, it would still be worth looking at because this woman's story is just amazing. So she was released as incurable. Her family cared for her at home as long as they could. But in 1860, her mother died. And her mother was the only person that seemed to understand her. Faced with having to care for an insane daughter on his own, her father made the heart-wrenching decision to put Rhoda away. He had her transferred to the Adams County almshouse. Now, almshouses in the middle of the 19th century were horrible places.
If I'm understanding, they were like the poorhouse.
Yeah, exactly. Almshouse, poorhouse, poor farm. There were many names for them, but they were basically an early social safety net. If you lost your farm, lost your home, were down on your luck, you could go to the county poor farm, and they would take you in, no questions asked, and you could find a safe place to live where you could get 3 hots and a cot. The only problem with this is that it's a sad fact of life that poor people go crazy too. And these poor farms were not equipped to deal with the mentally ill. So Rhoda shows up. She's been abandoned by her family. Her mother has died. She's lost the love of her life. Her fiancé is dust in the wind. Nobody knows where Charles is. To this day, nobody knows where Charles went. So she started acting out. She became very violent. She would snatch buttons off of women's blouses and swallow them. She would put anything into her mouth. I mean, she'd crawl around the floor. If she found a nail on the floor, she would just put it in her mouth and try to swallow it.
Oh.
Yeah, so she was so disturbed and deranged that she ended up being a danger to herself and to others. So the superintendent of the almshouse made the decision to have Rhoda put into something called a Utica crib. And it's just exactly the way the word sounds. It's a crib, like a baby's crib, but it has a locking lid on top, also with bars. It's basically a cage. And Rhoda was put into this crib. They were usually lined with hospital mattresses, but hers was lined with straw with a strategically cut hole in the bottom of it because she was put in there and she was not let out.
Oh, my word.
For weeks and months at a time. When she was let out, she was cared for by other feeble-minded inhabitants of the poor farm. Her hips atrophied from not being able to walk around. When she was let out, she could no longer stand on her own. In her fury at being locked up like this, she started to self-abuse. She clawed her own eyes out. She beat her front teeth in. She was just a wreck. And she spent decades in this situation. Now, in 1902, Dr. George Zeller became superintendent of the Peoria State Hospital.
A very good man, by the way.
Oh, he was amazing. If you know, they play that game where if you could meet anybody in history, alive or dead, if you could have dinner with anybody, he's on my top 5. He's on my top 3 list of people I'd love to meet. So he was put in charge of the Peoria State Hospital, and he decided that this was going to be an asylum like no other in the history of the United States. When people were put into an asylum, they were usually allowed to stay for only about 2 years. If you weren't cured in 2 years, you were discharged as incurable, and your bed was used for somebody else who might have a chance of being cured. Dr. Zeller said, no, these people need help. I don't care how long it takes. The Peoria State Hospital was the first hospital in Illinois that was designed for long-term care. It was the only one for a very long time. And he also believed very firmly that there was no patient that was incurable. Well, how do you prove that? You go around to the almshouses where you know that there are mentally disturbed people, and you find the worst maltreated cases. You cherry pick the worst of the worst cases, and you bring them to your asylum. And that's how you prove to everyone, the naysayers, the reporters that show up, all your fellow doctors, that's how you prove that this institution is something that is needed in the state of Illinois, something that is vital to the citizens of the state of Illinois. So in 1904, he came to the Adams County Almshouse, and he found Rhoda there. He took one look at Rhoda in her cage, and he said, this patient is coming with me. And the superintendent of the almshouse didn't want to let Rhoda go because he figured the almshouse was going to be blamed for her condition. So the train from Quincy got into Bartonville very late that night. There was a washout on the tracks. So the freight train that was carrying these patients from the Adams County Almshouse didn't get into Bartonville until about 1:30 in the morning. The patients, there were about 60 of them that were being transferred to the Peoria State Hospital. The patients were being transported on boxcars. So the train reached the top of the hill and chugged into the station, and all the nurses and the attendants were there to meet it. So they escorted the patients off of the boxcars, and they went onto the car to see if there was anybody left behind. And they see this great big wicker laundry basket at one end of the boxcar. And the attendants look at each other. They're like, well, patient laundry, I guess. I don't know. I guess this comes off the train. Yeah, sure, let's take it off the train. So we've got one attendant on each end of this huge wicker laundry basket. And they lift it up and they hump it off the boxcar and they put it none too gently on the platform of the train station. And as soon as they set the basket down, the lid of the basket lifts, the closed part, and there sits Rhoda, jabbering away at people. She was being transported in the basket because her hips had degenerated so much that she could not sit in a wheelchair. And that night, for the first time in 44 years, Rhoda Derry slept in a bed with clean white sheets. She spent the last 2 years of her life with us on the hilltop.
And that is an amazing story. I know I'm clicheing all over the place, but my goodness, that just sounds fantastic.
Yes.
And this and the actual details and everything and I'm assuming how she got better, hopefully, are all in the book.
Yes. Rhoda's entire story is in the book. The people that love the Peoria State Hospital love Rhoda too. She's one of our spirits. She's one of our favorites because of her excruciating history and the fact that she finally found peace with us. We tend to think of her as a ghost, as a spirit, and she is. But what I wanted to do with this book is to show people that she wasn't always this withered, wizened husk of an old woman. She was a young girl at one point. She was a young girl in love. So I wanted to bring Rhoda alive for people that read the book, and I'm hoping that I've done that.
Well, I'm excited about it. I'm looking forward to reading it. I know that you mentioned this on one of the past shows. You mentioned that you were working on this book, and so I'm assuming you've been working on this one a long time.
Yes, it is a project that is very dear to my heart, and it's very personal to me, as you'll find out when you read the book. I put a lot of myself into the book, too. So I hope people find some inspiration in Rhoda's story.
I guess the question that comes to my mind about the book is the research and what you had to do to get the details of the story. Were there journals, or how did you do that?
Oh, well, Ron, I tell you what, I stand on the shoulders of giants with just about every book I write. I was very fortunate in that Rhoda has some relatives that are alive and in the area. I shouldn't phrase it that way. Rhoda doesn't have any descendants, of course, because she never married, she never had children. But she had 8 brothers and sisters, and they had kids. So there are relatives of Rhoda Derry around today. And one of them, Doc Derry, wrote a little book about his famous aunt. And he published it through his self-publishing company. I got that and read it and referred to it many, many times. And I was fortunate enough to be able to talk with Doc on the phone and exchange emails with him. And he actually provided other pieces of the story that he found after he published this book. They've continued to do research on their family history. So there are little facts in my book that are not in Doc's book because he shared them with me after his book was published. And I had the most wonderful experience a few weeks ago. In the town where I live, there's a huge 2-day festival called the Marigold Festival, and people come from all over the place to attend this. There's an arts and crafts fair and rides and games and food tents and all that. So it's a big thing. It's a big deal. And I love going to it because it's my hometown. I see a lot of people that I know as I'm manning my booth. A lot of people that I know walk by. So I'm at my booth on Saturday. It's Saturday and Sunday. On Saturday, I'm at my booth, and my mailman walks by. I go, hey, it's my favorite mailman. And I have my books out on the table, and he stops to talk, and I gestured to the books on the table, and I said, this is what you have been bringing to my house and leaving on my porch. Thank you for doing that. Thank you for always bringing my books to me when I order them. And he caught sight of Fractured Spirits that was sitting on the table. And he smiled, and he said, my great-great-grand uncle was Dr. Zeller.
Oh, wow. Oh, wow. Talk about coincidences.
Oh, that's marvelous. I am so pleased to hear that. That is so cool. So on Sunday, I'm at my booth, and other vendors are walking around, and another vendor approached my booth, and I could tell she was another vendor because she had this beautiful handmade glass necklace on, just really gorgeous. And she was wearing a name tag that had the name of her booth, handcrafted glass by whoever. And her name tag said Laura Derry.
No.
And and I know not everybody's into genealogy. I didn't realize this, but I looked and I said, do you know who some of your ancestors were? She looked at me and smiled. She said one word, Rhoda.
Oh, wow.
My jaw dropped. I must have looked like a carp standing there with my mouth opening and closing. I was like, you here. And I had a couple of advanced copies of 44 Years in Darkness on the table, and I shoved it at her. And I said, this book is about Rhoda. So she was kind enough to buy a couple of copies. She bought one for herself, and she bought one for a cousin of hers in Georgia that does do genealogy. So she's going to send it to this cousin, so this cousin will read my book too. So
amazing.
So yeah, I mean, Saturday Dr. Zeller, Sunday Rhoda, and they're still around. The past still touches us today.
That is incredible. All right, so my next question about the book, and it's going back to something you said about Rhoda being one of the patrons still of the hospital. Do you have any stories that you can tell us, or tell us why you think that Rhoda's still there?
Oh, absolutely. Rhoda's ghost is one of the more famous on the hilltop because her story is so compelling and so strange. She's one of people's favorite stories to hear about. Her ghost is very distinctive. When she was alive, Rhoda had picked up the habit of chewing tobacco. She picked up this habit when she was still in her teens.
That is crazy,
know, right?
But okay. That's not one that I would think Rhoda would have access to.
I wouldn't think so either, but yeah, apparently this is a thing for her. And it was rumored that she would tell your fortune in return for some chaw. And that was one of the things that Doc wrote about in his book and that I write about in my book. After she was released from the Jacksonville asylum, when she came home before she was in the almshouse, Rhoda, she picked up the ability to tell fortunes. And I don't know if she inherited this from her grandmother Mal or what, but something in her delivery just put people off. People were not impressed by this talent. People were just weirded out. There was a man who came up to the cabin one day, and Rhoda asked him for some tobacco, and he gave it to her. And, she accepted the chaw, bit off a plug, and started working it around. And she said, Mr. Miller, you've come to sell bridle and tack to my father for his horse. And he was but he was so freaked out about this that he just got back on his horse and just skedaddled. He was just too weirded out by this to stay. So something in her delivery was just off. But yes, it was a well-known family story that she would tell your fortune in return for some tobacco. So she kept this habit even when she was at the Peoria State Hospital. She could no longer walk, but she could get around by crawling across the floor on her hands and knees. So if she knew that you had tobacco in your pocket, she would kind of crab across the floor, and she'd sit down next to you, and she'd tug on your pants leg, begging for some chaw. So the story goes, the lore goes, that if you are anywhere on that hilltop, especially if you're standing in front of Rhoda's grave in Cemetery 1, and if you feel tugging on your pants leg and you smell chewing tobacco, that's Rhoda trying to communicate with you.
Wow.
Yeah. And I had the great good fortune to spend a weekend in July with a group made out of 3 separate groups of ghost hunters who all came to the Peoria State Hospital to do an investigation. Put in a little plug for them. If you go to YouTube and you like shadow hunters, they're about to come out with a brand new series of investigative shows. And one of the very early, I think the second show, is going to be on the Pollock Hospital at the Peoria State Hospital. And it will blow your mind. It is so much fun. So go to YouTube, like Shadow Hunters on YouTube, and you'll be able to watch this.
I will do that.
Thank you. So I got to tag along with them and be their native guide to the Pollock Hospital. And I have a couple of other stories about that experience that I'll get to. So we're at the hospital, and I'm like, why can't I clone myself? They're splitting up into groups, and I can only follow one group at a time. This is maddening. So I was not there for this particular instance. I was with another group. But Lisa was with a group, and they were in a room of the hospital doing an investigation, and she felt someone grasp her leg just below the knee. And she spoke up and she said, hey, someone's touching my leg. Someone's kind of grabbing and circling my leg. And one of the guides said, oh, that's probably Rhoda. And Lisa, she's sensitive. She can make contact with the other side to a certain extent. She was fascinated with Rhoda's story because I shared Rhoda's story with everyone. And that was Friday night. And then Saturday, all day Saturday, she was thinking about this encounter she'd had with Rhoda. And she said to herself, that's so unfair. She said, this poor woman suffered so much in life, and in the afterlife, she's still reduced to crawling around on the floor and grabbing people's legs. This sucks. This is so unfair. So they got back to the hospital for the second evening of investigation. They got there late afternoon. After Lisa had walked into the building and gotten her bearings and started looking around, she became aware that Rhoda was next to her. And she looked down, made eye contact with Rhoda, and Rhoda looked up at her, made sure that Lisa noticed her, and then she got to her knees. Rhoda got to her knees and stood up, tall and proud.
Oh, wow.
And gestured to herself as if to say, see, I'm whole on the other side. And Lisa said that she got the opinion, that she got the feeling from Rhoda that the reason Rhoda tugs on people's pants legs is because she knows that's what's expected of her. She knows that that is a good shorthand for her to let you know that, yes, that is Rhoda you're feeling. But she wanted Lisa to know that, yes, she is okay on the other side. She's not crippled on the other side. She's whole and hearty and healthy on the other side. So, yeah.
That kind of gives you chills.
I know, but in the best way.
In the best way, yeah. Well, that's what I like about your stories as opposed to a lot of ghost hunters. They try to make everything so terrifying. And one show in particular just is always bad news. And I won't mention the name. And they just are constantly making you feel like, boy, I'd never want to experience that. And then you come tell us these stories, and what is the truth? Well, I'm guessing there's probably truth in both, but
I would imagine there is.
I would like to think that the after place is going to be something that's going to be good for us all.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's scary because we don't know anything about it right now, but it's just a different form of existence. I mean, that's what science, if you want to look at it in an absolutely scientific way, Science tells us that energy can neither be created nor destroyed.
That's right.
So the soul, I mean, the human body is just a big battery. We act on electrical impulses, but the soul, what makes us who we are, that's energy. And that can't be lost. It goes somewhere. Yeah. So whether it hangs around or if it goes to some other hall of Akashic records, I don't know. I'm in the middle of reading one of the Idiot's Guides, the Idiot's Guide to Discovering Your Past Lives. And it raised the question. No, I'm serious. It raised the question because ever since I was a kid, I've loved ghost stories, and I've loved stories about the weird. And I've been reading stories about reincarnation ever since I was a little kid. And I was raised Christian. I was raised to believe in heaven and hell. But all these stories about reincarnation just really fired my imagination. And when I grew up and decided I could make my own decision on this sort of thing, it's the only thing that makes sense to me. I've heard so many anecdotes, and I know the plural of anecdote is not data. I understand that. But all these stories of these things that people have experienced, there's got to be some truth somewhere in there.
Yep.
So I'm reading this book on The Idiot's Guide to Discovering Your Past Lives, and it raised an interesting question. One of the questions they asked, and I had never thought of this before, what if in one of your past lives you hung around for a while and you were a ghost?
Why not?
That had never even occurred to me.
Well, it's funny you should mention that, because one of the things that I did for preparation for this particular show was I asked my listeners to send in some ghost stories.
Woo! Get the ghost story
yes,
part. Yay!
And I think that I'm going to go ahead, because what you're talking about here kind of ties in with it.
Oh,
so
lay it on me.
So let me read this ghost story to you, and then we'll continue this conversation, because I think we would have gotten there anyway.
Okay.
So are you ready for this?
I am ready.
Okay, well, this comes from Marion Butler, who lives in Stevens Point, Wisconsin.
Oh, I know Stevens Point.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, they do the trivia contest every year.
I come from Wisconsin originally. So here is Marion's story.
Mm-hmm.
She says, both my parents were in the National Guard. Each summer, my sister and I would go live with our grandparents on their farm in Kentucky. We continue to do this today, even though my parents have retired from the military. To say that my grandma's house is haunted is an understatement. So many stories over so many years, I'd love to tell you them all. Let me start with the very first one I remember. We came in late for the summer drop-off, and my grandparents were asleep. My parents got us tucked into bed, and they had to leave because they had to get back. I was 8, and my sister was 10. The next morning, an old man came into the room and woke us both up. He said, "Get dressed, we got a lot of chores to do before the sun comes up." We looked at each other and shrugged. We knew that Grandpa had hired some help, so we figured this was him. We quickly got ready, as fast as a couple girls can do that, and went downstairs. No Grandpa, and it was still dark outside. The old man was there, and he pointed outside. He had my sister feed the chickens and the pigs, and he had me gather the eggs and sweep out the chicken poop. Coop.
Well, same difference.
Yeah. We were getting the last of the work done when my grandpa came out and asked us what we were doing. We told him about the old man and our assigned chores. My grandpa looked quite perplexed. He said he had hired for the summer, but he was staying in town that night and he was not old. So, and then it goes on to say, just 5 minutes before Grandpa came out, I was talking with the old man, and he was telling me how well I was doing my chores. Well, we looked all over the farm and found no sign of him. However, that was not the last time we saw him, and I will save that story for another time.
Oh, Marion, you're wonderful.
Yeah, I
Keep
think
us on the
Marion,
edge of our
it's one of
seats.
the best stories I've ever gotten, I have to admit.
Yeah. Oh, how fun.
And, and they looked, according to this note, they looked all over for this old man, couldn't find him. And yet she's alluding to the fact that they wasn't the last time that they saw him. So, Marion, please send us part 2.
Oh, yes. I would love to hear part 2. Because that's so rare. I mean, when you hear ghost stories, they're like, oh, I had this experience, and then poof, the guy vanished, and we never saw him again. You don't have recurring interactions with these spirits most of the time. So I would be very interested to hear a further encounter.
And I'm hoping this is the beginning of a good friendship. I'm maybe even trying to get Marion. If you want to come on the show, we'd love to have you.
Yes, please consider it.
Yes. Anyway, but you can see how that ties in with your story about Rhoda. Here's a guy that let's just assume, because we have no way of knowing, but perhaps he lived on that farm, saw these 2 kids in this bed and said, well, there's no place for kids to be. They should be out working. And gets them doing chores that, well, probably Grandpa would have had them do anyway.
Well, sure. It's not above their level of ability to do. Collect eggs and sweep out the chicken coop and feed the pigs. Yeah, that's what a farm kid would have been doing when the farm was in its heyday, and if it was a little girl 8 or 10 years old.
Didn't matter.
I can see him just utilizing the available labor, and yeah.
Yeah. Well,
I have a story that it does not involve the asylum in any way, shape, or form, but we're talking about farmer ghosts, and I have that story to share with you.
Well, let's hear it.
Okay, all right. So I have a friend who used to live about an hour and a half north of me out in the country, and he is sensitive. He is able to see spirits if the conditions are right, and he says it's like dialing in a radio station. There's static on either side, but if you get it tuned just right, he can actually see these spirits and communicate with them. So David liked to go to the local strip club out in the middle of the cornfields. And he would go there, I don't know, once a month, once every couple of months or so. But because of his sensitivities, he knew that before the strip club had been built, there had been a farmhouse on that site. And this old farmer was still hanging around the property. And David had several conversations with this old farmer, this old crusty farmer guy. And I'll never forget, one of the stories that David told was he was sitting at the bar, and he became aware that Clyde was on the bar stool next to him. And Clyde turned to David, and he's like, man, you got to do something about this. And David's like, do something about what? He goes, there's these naked women traipsing around my house. My wife's going to kill me. You got to get them out of here. David had to tried to explain to him. He's like, your house hasn't been here for like 60 years. It's not a house anymore. And how do you explain a strip club to somebody from the 19th century?
I know how to do that. You don't.
1920s or whatever. How do you explain that concept to this crusty old farmer guy?
Well, he's probably caught in a time loop anyway. So things look one way to him, and it doesn't look that way to us.
Right, yeah, that's the thing. He is in his reality, and all he can see are these naked women traipsing about. And this guy's sitting there on the bar stool just grizzling away, and all of a sudden one of the dancers comes down and sits in that bar stool.
Oh, no.
Sits right in the middle of the ghost. And Clyde just poofs away in this swirl of mist. And, I was just laughing so hard when David was telling me that story.
Well, that's a good one. Okay, I have another one.
Okay.
All right. So this one also comes from a listener, but it isn't quite as nice as the last one.
Ooh.
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
It starts out, "Hey, Ron, you asked for stories, and I have one for you. My name is Mike, and I'm originally from Texas, but live in New Mexico at the moment. In New Mexico, one thing you can do is drive. The desert is endless and nothing short of amazing, and I find peace just going out there to lose myself. It is relaxing. That is, until it isn't. One night, I was driving home from a day of wine tasting. Many folk don't realize that New Mexico really has some fine vineyards, and it can be a wonderful day trip. I was sober, clean, and safe. However, my car may have had one too many and broke down. I pulled over to the side of the road and realized that my phone was missing. This was going to be a long wait. I put out flares, donned an orange vest, and thought about breaking out some of the cheese and crackers that I had bought. Out of nowhere, a man came up to the car and started walking around it. He seemed particularly interested in the flares. I got out of the car and started to tell him my problems. He totally ignored me and kept looking at those darn flares. I started in again, and again he ignored me. Finally, I shouted, "Hey, are you deaf?" It was then he looked up at me, and I saw he had no face. Where his eyes were 2 yellow dots. I took a step back and tripped on something, and when I got back up, the man, or whatever it was gone. About an hour later, a patrol car rolled up, and I got the help I needed. I decided then and there not to tell the policeman my story. What do you think of that one? Now, the reason I thought that was a good one to interject right then is because that's the other side of the ghost story.
Yeah.
The freaky, scary, I could have been killed ghost story, you know?
That's creepy. Yeah. Wow. And to think that he had to spend another hour.
Yeah. He had to
in
sit
the
there another
dark
hour.
just waiting. Oh.
But what do you think of that one?
Oh. Mike, you're a wonderful storyteller. I have chills chasing each other up and down my spine right now. Oh, I think that if I were in that situation with no phone and alone in the middle of the desert and somebody came up and didn't have a face, I would have to be rummaging in the glove box for a change of pants. Oh, wow. What a hair-raising experience.
Yeah, and what I love is the contrast between the two stories. It just goes to show us so much about the spiritual side of things, is that there is good in the spiritual side, but there's not good there too.
There's some really terrifying stuff out there.
And we don't know, this might have been a harmless guy too, but obviously this person felt like he was being menaced, Mike. So I don't know, it's just that whole world has me stumped sometimes. Just when I think I have figured out what I think it is, then I hear a story that changes my mind yet again.
And that's the wonderful thing about being interested in this sort of thing and having it as a hobby and having it as an interest. There's so much fascinating lore out there and so much fascinating history that still touches us today.
Yeah. You're so right about that. One of the things that I do, and it's relatively new for me, it actually started when I started listening to podcasts, and that was listening to people tell their stories. Because, you can out and out tell when someone is fabricating a story and it's not real.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
pretty obvious. But these two stories, there's got to be truth to them. There absolutely has to be.
You can feel the sincerity in the words.
Exactly. It isn't like,
Yeah.
here's a guy, he's out wine tasting in New Mexico, which, by the way, I had no idea that if I had to pick a state that I would say no wine would be New Mexico. I've been there. I can't imagine there being vineyards in New Mexico. But there must
so
be.
Dry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, it's just the way the story is told is, here I am. I'm on a wonderful day trip, and it didn't go wonderful in the night. And
this is what happened.
So I don't know. I just love it. And I want to thank, I want to say it one more time. Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Marion. These stories were
thank you
really
for sharing
timely.
Your stories. It was an absolute pleasure to hear your stories told, and thank you. Thank you, thank you.
Well, Sylvia, I think that we've done enough damage for today. What do you think?
Well, I would like to say that if people have enjoyed hearing these two personal ghost stories, they might want to check out my podcast. It's called Lights Out, and that's what this is. That's my whole philosophy behind Lights Out is having people tell me their stories, and I put them on the air. So you can go to YouTube and look for Lights Out and subscribe to the podcast and hear me share stories just like the ones you just heard.
Now, I just listened to one of yours, and I was absolutely fascinated by it. It was one that you actually went to I think it must have been a convention, and walked around and just asked people what they thought about ghosts. And, and I just loved that episode of your podcast. I recommend it to the listeners because here you just ask people, well, what do you think? And it was pretty cool.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'll tell you how I got the idea for that particular broadcast. Is I was at this convention, I was manning a table, and I was there was nobody at my table at that particular moment, but there was somebody at the table across from me having a conversation. So I was just eavesdropping to pass the time. And it was the guy at the table said, I caught just a snippet of the conversation, but the guy manning the table said, and that's when I became a believer in the supernatural. And I sat there and mulled that over. I thought, wow, what a good question to ask people. We've got this convention full of paranormal investigators, people who are interested in it, people who go out and sit in dark attics with only the red light of a recorder to keep them company. And how did you become a believer in something that 80% of the world thinks is complete hooey? People are freaked out by this. How did you become attracted to this? What made you believe enough to make this part of your life? So I asked people questions. I asked that question of people, and I got some really great stories from it.
You did, and I got to say, I enjoyed that podcast immensely.
Oh, thank you.
All right, so how can we get the new book?
You can go to Amazon. It goes on sale October 10th. It's up on Amazon right now, and it says available for pre-order. So it's 44 Years in Darkness, and 44 is a number. So type that in. You'll see the Kindle edition. You'll see the actual book edition. And I am very pleased to be able to tell you that it will soon be available as an audiobook.
No. Really?
I know, yeah.
That's exciting.
Yeah, it's going to be so much fun. I talked to one of my publishers about it, and at first I really wanted to do the narration myself because I love reading my own stories. I love reading stories in general. But then I thought, well, I want this done in a timely manner and technically perfect. And I'm not sure I can promise either one of those. So I said, you know what? I will put vanity aside and I will let someone else do the recording. And I talked to the publisher and I said, I just simply ask for reasons that will become apparent when you read the book. I simply ask that it's a woman doing the narration. And he wrote back to me and he said, Sylvia, don't you know this is an author-friendly company? We put out a call for readers, and then we audition them, and then we send the best of them to you so you can pick who narrates your book.
So you got to pick who got to read it.
I know, yeah, it's wonderful. I haven't done it yet. They're putting out the call for auditions very soon, but I'm really looking forward to hearing these talented narrators and what they're going to do with the words that I put on the page.
So I shouldn't apply then, huh?
No. There's a part of the book it's best read by a woman. Yeah. You haven't read the book yet, so you have no idea what I'm talking about.
Not yet. Well, the book isn't available to me. Now, when this podcast is published, however, the book is already available. So we're recording this, I believe today is October 6th. And so the book will be out when you hear this.
Yes, the book is available. We'll rephrase that. The book is available on Amazon.
Right. All right, Sylvia, how can they get a hold of you if they so desire?
Well, I have a blog at sylviashults.wordpress.com. That's SHULTS. And I would love to hear from people who listen to this podcast and enjoyed it. And I love to hear true ghost stories. So if you have any to share, please contact me at sylviashults.wordpress.com. I'm also on Facebook. I have a couple of pages there, Ghosts of the Illinois River and Fractured Spirits.
Well, Sylvia, to say this was a pleasure doesn't even seem to cut it. I'm going to say this was a fun time, and let's do it again.
Sounds wonderful, Ron. Thank you so much for inviting me back, and it was a blast as always.
Now that truly was a whole lot of fun. Thank you, Sylvia, for your stories and for being that librarian motorcycle gang member from Born to Read. I'm looking forward to your new book, 44 Years in Darkness, a true story of madness, tragedy, and shattered love. If you guys missed any of the links that Sylvia spoke of, I will have them in the show notes. I leave you with this final thought. Dick Cavett once said, "Why are people afraid of ghosts? Oh no, I wouldn't want to see one, I'd be too scared," is the common reaction. This puzzles me. I'd think anyone would welcome the opportunity. I've never heard of a ghost hurting anybody. Well, with that, I thank you, Mr. Cavett. I hope that you enjoyed this episode of Ron's Amazing Stories. It's always a pleasure. Coming up next week on the podcast is the 6th annual Old Time Horror with Jim Harold. Jim also has a brand new book out, so please join us next week to find out more and to hear more ghost stories. If you want to keep up with what's happening on Ron's Amazing Stories, please follow us on Twitter, Facebook, or sign up for the weekly newsletter. All the links you'll need and access to the blog can be found at ronsamazingstories.com. Thank you for listening, and I hope you come again to find out what are Ron's Amazing Stories.
All of the vintage audio used in the podcast is believed to be in the public domain. Ron's Amazing Stories does not own the rights to any of the old-time radio used here. If you hold the rights to any of the shows played, please contact us immediately at ronsamazingstories.com.